All right, so I hope it's recording. I think it's recording. So hello, everybody. My name is Nadia Blaustein, and today I will be presenting the data preprocessing module of the QLSC 612 course for the summer 2022 edition. And so the point of this module is to sort of give you an idea of where you can kind of begin when you have to face your own data preprocessing challenge. And of course, the reason why here this is called more art than science is because it's, you have to customize this sort of pipeline to your own specific data set. There's a lot of, decision making that goes in to the way you pre-process your data. Some of it can be a bit more arbitrary than other decisions, but so this is just, and it's not, so it's not like a one size fits all. And this isn't necessarily a very rigid protocol that applies to all data sets. It's sort of just to give you a general idea of steps that people usually do that are kind of generalizable to most data sets. And we'll be working with a data set that I put up on a remote repository on GitHub. So just, I hope you guys had time to go through the module about how to use GitHub. One thing that's fun about it is that if you have a data set that's kind of small, you can upload it to GitHub, and essentially then you can clone it onto your own clone that data onto your own computer. So other people can clone it onto their own computers. So this data set here, you can quickly take a look at the README file over here. We're basically using the open access data from the Human Connectome project. So we have a nice CSV file. We have volume data as well that was extracted at Dr. Millar Chakravarty's Computational Brain Anatomy Lab, so affiliated with McGill and the Douglas Research Institute. And then we have a few 20 two-dimensional .png images. And this is just to kind of give you a little bit of a taster for image processing, but just a little bit, because we won't have time to go into this in a lot of detail. And so the format of today's module, this tutorial, which normally will be given in person, but the way I'll do it for YouTube is that I'll just walk through the notebook. And so from time to time, there'll be different questions interspersed in this notebook. And so what I really recommend you to do is to pause the video when a question crops up and to try to answer it yourself, because the best way to learn this sort of thing is by, hands-on experience. And so it's worth that extra time that you take to try to solve the problem yourself, because then you're going to remember the solution for longer. And so this is just an overview of the contents of the notebook. But the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to clone this remote repository onto your local computer. And often, when invoking bash through your Jupyter notebook, you should precede a command with an exclamation point or a percentage sign in the case of the cd command. So here, we're going to clone this into our directory. And basically, if you look at your computer, the directory from which you launched the current notebook should now have a directory called Open Access HCP data. And so we can quickly take a look, if we ls, as you can see over here, this is the current notebook that we just launched, and this is the Open Access Human Connectome Project data directory. And so we can quickly, let's go into it and look at, how it's formatted. So here we entered it, and this is kind of what it looks like. And so we have some CSV data, we have a README file. We should also have a, here we have our CSV file over here. Here we have our 2D image files, and then here we have our README. And so, once again, this is where you can read more about the data we'll be working with, but more specifically, we'll pre-process CSV data, which is similar to an Excel spreadsheet. You can convert Excel files to CSV and vice versa very easily. And they're just files that allow you to handle tables without too many complications, because they can store numerical and string data. And then we also have our 2D image files over here. So we can quickly look in each directory. So over here, as you see, we have our 2D image files, and the way they seem to be numbered is that, you have here, so the nomenclature for different data sets is obviously important. So here, HCP means Human Connectome Project, right? Here we have some sort of a subject number. And as you can see over here, we have 3 images per subject, and you're going to know why soon enough, because essentially for each subject, we're looking at brain MRI images, and I just screenshot 2D slices of their MRIs. So you're going to see the axial view, the coronal view, and the sagittal view. So 3 2D images as opposed to 1 3D image, because that's multidimensional. 3D MRI data is really big. And it requires kind of its own sort of set of processing tools. So we obviously don't have time for that today. And this is just this gives you more info about the actual images, T1 weighted MRI scan. And here there's some info about how they were pre-processed. Then over here, if we just ls the CSV data, we have two CSV files. So one is the unrestricted human connectome project behavioral data. And then we also have a CSV file with different volumes. So we'll take a look at what this means later. But the first step is to just load and examine your data. And as you saw in the previous workshop on NumPy and Pandas, they're really important Python package libraries in order to do any kind of scientific programming and data analysis. So you have to import them, of course. And then here, the first command is we're actually just reading our data file. And just so that you know what this looks like. So DF, we're creating a data frame. And over here, our data frame kind of looks like this. So you can quickly take a look. And just in general, when you're kind of pre-processing data and doing this sort of thing, it's very important to sort of do these regular check marks. And that's one thing that's cool about a Jupyter notebook is that you have these specific cells that you can run all one at a time. So you can kind of temporarily, insert a cell quickly by pressing A, it'll insert a cell above the current one. B will insert a cell below the current one. And then if you press, you press the cell and you do DD, it just deletes the cell. And so it's really good to kind of from time to time, take a look at the data frame you're currently working with to make sure that stuff is still making sense. Because, as the gold standard for any kind of quality assurance is obviously, looking at something with your own eyes. So yeah, just so you know, and so here we have question 1. For which I already gave you the solution anyways, so sorry. But essentially, question 1 is asking you, so basically, it's asking you how many subjects as rows and features as columns you have. And it's important to note that you can't, often, the standard is going to be in a 2D CSV file with a certain n subjects and say D features. Each row is going to be information about one subject, and each column is going to be a feature such as total brain volume, age, or sex, or gender. But you can't always assume that your subjects are rows and your features are columns. So it's really important to kind of read about your data before you go into your analysis. And also there's sometimes strange header rows with useless information that you need to remove. So you can just kind of open the CSV file and remove it, or you can use Python to remove it. So that's kind of up to you. But essentially, if you do like the df.shape command basically tells you data frame.shape. So once again, it was a 2D array. So we know that it has 1,206 rows and 499 columns. And so the rows correspond to number of subjects. So here we have a pretty little F string that kind of outputs it in a nicer way. So we know that we have 1,206 subjects and 499 features. And so then the next thing that's nice to do is that you can kind of examine your data frame in the empty code cell below. I'm giving you a few examples of valuable commands for a preliminary look at your data frame. For instance, there's df.info that gives you info about it, the data types, df.describe. This gives you kind of like, more information, I guess, about all your features. df.columns tells you, lists your columns over here. So you get your column names. Oops. You also should not be making typos. Okay, df.columns. So I should correct this error. And then we also have df.head. And what's cool about this one too, by default prints 5 rows, but you can do like df.head 10, so it can print 10 rows, or df.head 3, and it'll just print 3 rows. And same for tail. The default, I think, should be 5 as well. And then, so you can kind of like pick, print as many. So this is just good to know. These are some basic commands in case you weren't aware, you can't remember them. So next, let's just select the gender column just to count how many instances we have of each value, because that's a feature that's very straightforward to look at. And just to note that the code below uses an F string, which I mentioned earlier. And so you have to, this kind of makes the format of what you're printing kind of prettier. So it looks cleaner and cleaner and clearer. So that's kind of, pretty isn't always, your priority, of course, is not for things to be pretty, but it's just often it's important for things to be clear so that, maybe in a year, you're going to look back to what you did and you're going to kind of have no idea why you did something. So maybe, having checkpoints with F strings can be useful. So here we're going to print, a list of the unique values in our gender column. So you can just use the df.unique command like this. And so basically what it outputs is an array. So, so here are the only possible values for this feature in our data set. So we only have M and F for this in this specific data set. So another thing that's really useful to know is the actual value count. So you might want to know, how many times M or F appear here. And so here we see that we have 656 females and 550 males for this specific data set. So those are two very useful commands. And so another another question for you would be, is there another way to count how many males and females are in this data set? And so this, to do this, you can kind of subset, take a subset of associated with your gender column. So, pause the video, try to figure out, moving forward, I'll just kind of, whenever you see quite a question in bold, just, take the initiative to pause the video yourself. But basically, so for here, so one thing you can do is, I don't know if you've seen subsetting, but basically something very elegant in Python in general is that you can kind of take a subset of a data frame. So for instance, you can, we have df gender, right? So here you're looking at your gender column. And then what you can do is you can select a subset. You can basically tell Python, okay, how about you print all the rows associated with, subjects for which the gender value the gender feature has a value of F, right? So here you kind of subset this. So that's very elegant. This is really useful to look at subsets of age as well, and other properties. So it's good to know. You can do the same thing, of course, with M. And then another way to do this, and then you can kind of look at the length, right? And here, so this will give you the number of males you have in your subset as well. So that's kind of another way to do this. And it's just good in general in Python, there's a million different ways to do everything, especially if you an advantage of Python is that there are so many packages and libraries available out there that there's probably, if there's something that takes a lot of lines of code, there's probably a package or library out there that does it in a shorter way. So that's also something that's worth bearing in mind. Okay, so this sort of displaying only the rows associated with females. And that's sort of, here you go. So it's kind of, I just showed this to you. Okay, so something important to bear in mind is also just documentation. I started this off by showing you the README of the data that you're using for this specific notebook. And that specific data set also has its own documentation. I kind of just made it, an intermediary sort of README file for it. But it's really important to always know where your data set's documentation is. So I gave you guys the link for the Human Connectome project data set. So you understand better what all the abbreviation means and what all the behavioral measures you'll be looking at are. And unfortunately, thorough documentation is not always available. Some data types are also very field specific, and they do require the help of experts, which is part of what makes data science so wonderfully interdisciplinary. And this is why your own neuroscience backgrounds will be very valuable within a data science context. And so let's quickly look at the features that we have, because now we have our data dictionary open. So that you see a column that has this word to it. So now you can, a column with this name, you now can know that it's associated with income. And but we don't have tier 1 restricted data. I'm only showing you the open access data, but you can always ask for permission, by the way, to access the restricted data. If there's a project idea that you have and you're very passionate about it, it's an open source data set. So yeah, let's print our columns. But so here, when we print our columns, because we have 499 of them, it's not outputting all of them. So another question I have is, just in order to help you practice doing for loops, is there a way to, be able to print every single column so you can kind of look at everything? So pause the video, and then here's the solution is very simple. One line of code. For for loops, you can obviously do it this way too, but it's just nicer if you can do something in one line instead of two in Python. Why not do it? So here, and now you can kind of scroll through all your data, through all your columns. This is 499 different features, and once again, this is where the data dictionary becomes critical. because there's no, there's no way to know what all of these abbreviations mean. So now that we've kind of loaded and examined our data, the next step is to kind of reformat it. And so this means, you want to select, one step would be to select the features that you want to work with. So as you saw above, this data frame has 499 features. And often you will only want to work with a subset of the features of a data frame. So you will have to create a new data frame with this subset. And so this is kind of the code that you use. So you can make a subset, can be a list of column names, so a list of strings, and then you kind of just do df basics. So we can, here we're basically printing all of our basic variables over here. And so essentially, sorry, so here we have a data frame where we print the part of the data frame associated with subject, gender, age, and bedtime. Now we can also add, some cognitive variables to the mix, just to have more, to be looking at more variables for the rest of this workshop. So let's look at the ones associated with fluid intelligence, because they all start with PMAT. And then the ones associated with delay discounting, which start with DDISC. And so, here I'm telling you to fill in the code below. So once again, we have our basics, our basics list. And basically what we want to do is we want to add, what you want to do here is you want to append any kind of column name that has the word PMAT or DDISC in it. You want to append it to this cognition list, because then after that, we'll be able to select a subset of it. So, so here what you're doing is you have your original list, and then you're looking through, you have a for loop going through all the columns of your data frame. And, if you have a column that has, that actually has, so -1 is like false, right? So if you find a column that, actually has PMAT in it, that it's going to return 1 instead of -1. And so, or if it has this in it, what you're going to do is you're going to append that column to cognition. So you do, cognition.append, and then you can kind of print a list of variables that you're looking at. And so now we made a list of all the features that we want to examine. We can select the subset of our data and make it a separate data frame called df cognition. And so, I just showed you how to select a subset of your data, but let's do it again. So here you go. And so here we selected a subset of our data, and we have data cognition.head. And just by the way, if you do df cognition like this, okay, so we printed, here we have our subset, and as you can see, we have we have like only a subset of our data, right? But then if you print, we only have 22 columns, but if you reprint df, we have 499 columns, where it's not written here. Okay, but anyway, so the point, the df.head, sorry, df.head, let's do .head here. And then df, so df cognition, so df of df of our subset gives us 22 columns, and then df.head gives us 499 columns. So what this means is just that doing this doesn't actually save a subset. You're just looking at a subset, but you're not changing df. And so in order to change df, you should actually create a new data frame made of that subset. And so what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do df cognition equals to, so we created a new data frame here from which we subset certain features from the original df data frame. So yeah, and then a quick sanity check, right, is like, once again, we want to make sure the shape makes sense. We expect 22 features. We still have 1,206 subjects, so we are good to go. So next, so the next step is that you want to merge, here we want to merge two data frames. So for our data set of 1,206 subjects, we have information about their gender, age range, and a variety of cognitive measures. But it would be interesting to integrate some other data as well. And so you have been provided with a separate file that contains brain structure and volume data obtained from neuroimaging data of these same subjects. And note, though, that not all subjects in the Human Connectome project originally had neuroimaging data. And so, for more information, you can go there to learn about the preprocessing and that was done to obtain the volumes. And so, ls So once again, remember we have our 2D MRI data and our CSV data, and we want to just read in the volume data. So we're reading in our volume data sets, and let's just look at what it looks like, DF volumes. So over here, you have 1,086 rows and 14 columns of volumes from different structures. So that's good. And so how many subjects? So now we know how many subjects and features does DF volumes have, which is similar to a question we answered before. So if you want to pause this to try to remember exactly what it is, otherwise I'll just walk you through it quickly. So here we have 1,086 subjects had volume data, meaning that 1,086 subjects had MRI data, and then we have 14 features. So we extracted volume measures for about 14 brain structures. And so the next question is to print the mean and standard deviation of total brain volume in the sample. And you have to, just so you know, the units of this measurement is millimeters cubed. And so this is how you can do it. So you could literally just take, for any kind of column in a pandas data frame, you take that column and you just do dot mean, and you get the mean of that column across your subjects. And so here, same thing for standard deviation. So basically our brain images are about, our subjects have a brain volume of about 1.5 million millimeters cubed, which is interesting to know. And can you round this data? So this is just to help you practice the Python, learning about different Python functions. So one of them is the dot round. And basically the way you do is round. So round something, and then you put the input, and then you put the number of decimal places. And this makes it, aesthetically, you can kind of get a better idea of what's going on here. Then another question I had for you. So this is, again, we're subsetting. You want to list all of your subjects whose total brain volume is above average. So if you remember, you could do DF of TBV above it's our age, right? TBV. Okay. So here this time though, right? Like we want it to be above this. So here we're listing all of them. Whoops. Okay, I made an error. Where's my error? Huh. Oh, whoopsie. There had to be, wait, let's see. So DF, so now I'm going to try to correct my error. Oh, yeah, DF volumes, that's the error. So just in general, when you're coding, numbering, naming conventions are very important. So here we're listing all of them. And, a prettier way to do this would be, in case, like a more reproducible way to do this would be, instead of using that number, would just be to use df.mean. That way, if your data, I don't know, if your CSV file, you add like 3 more subjects to it, this mean value may change, but this, so you need this to be different, and this automatically will adjust, obviously, the mean according to how many subjects you added to your data frame. So now, let's merge our data frame, but the problem is that our behavioral data has 1,206 subjects, and our volume data only has 1,086 subjects. And so we should create a new data frame where we only keep the subjects for which we have all of our features, right? And so you can use the pandas merge function. And once again, this is a question, so feel free to pause and try to figure it out yourself. But otherwise, I'm just going to tell you. So we're going to merge it on subject because that's the column that the 2 data frames share. And then, and we have to rename it. We have to assign this to a new data frame, right? Otherwise, you're going to be able to see it, but it's not going to be saved anywhere as an object. So DF final is going to be our final data frame we'll work with. And so as you can see over here, we have subject, you have gender, age, bedtime, but then we also have all our volumes over here. So let's make sure that everything that has the right shape. And it seems to have the right shape. However, I don't know if you remember this, but we would expect 36 features because we have 22 features in DF cognition and 14 features in DF volumes. So why do you think, we only have 35 features in DF final? So think about this for 2 seconds, but I'll just tell you now, the reason is pretty straightforward. As I said before, the pandas merge method merged on the subject column. So the subject column is shared between DF cognition and DF volumes. And so the way the merge method works is that it's not going to repeat a column that we already have. It's not going to, that we have in both data frames, which is clever, right? And so essentially, and another cool thing about this method is that it only kept the subjects that we had present in both data frames, which is why Although we had 1,200 subjects in DF cognition, we're now down to 1,086. So now our data already things are starting together to come together. So the next step is data filtering. And there's many different ways to do this and different steps and different orders. So I'm just giving you a few ideas of ways that you can filter your data. So one thing you can do is you can remove features that you don't need. That's actually quite important to do. And so one really important thing is to make sure you don't have duplicate columns, because you're just making your data set bigger and more. It makes downstream processing more computationally demanding, but you're not actually adding any additional valuable information. And so this is a code that does that. So basically we're creating a list, an empty list, and then we're going to iterate through each column basically. And what you do over here is that you're trying to figure out if one column, you're comparing columns. So you're not comparing column names. We don't care if the column name is the same. We want to know if the values are the same. So what you're doing is you're actually comparing the values of column 1 to the values of column 2, column 1 to 3, column 1 to 4, etc. And then you do the same thing, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5. And the point of this is just to like compare the values, because you don't want to repeat information. And then if the values in two columns are exactly the same, even if maybe they might have different column names, you're going to first of all print the names of these columns so that you're aware of what's going on. And then you're going to just append them to this list called calls to drop. And then the last step is you're actually going to just drop your columns. And so what's interesting is that when you drop your columns, you use this function called dot drop, and you just give it a list of columns to drop in place. Axis, according to axis 1 means along the columns, you're dropping columns. But what's interesting, I don't know if you've noticed here, but we didn't actually reassign DF file to a new data frame. And that's something that's special about the drop method, is you don't actually need to do a reassignment. So it's permanent. So be careful with that one. So quick sanity check. Let's look at the shape. So here we had one column, right, that repeated itself. And originally DF final had 35 columns. So we'd expect to see 34 columns, right? And we do see 34, and let's just take a look at it directly even. Why not? And yeah, things still make sense. So the next step is to make your data actually machine readable, right? Which means it has to be numerical. So let's see if we have any non-numerical features over here. So here we're going to list all our D types, and in fact, we do. So anything that's not a floating integer, so object files, are non-numerical. So we have 3 columns, in fact, that are non-numerical, and so we're going to handle them one column at a time. And so the first step will be to one-hot encoder binarize your data. So this is really important when you're dealing with categorical measurements. So for instance, the gender column, it's categorical. In our specific case, it has 2 unique possible values, M or F. And so one thing you can do in order to binarize your data is you can replace all your M values with 1 and all your F values with 2. And this is also where, documentation and saving your code is super important, because maybe downstream you have replaced your M and F with different numbers, but you might forget which number was assigned to which value. And so it's really important to be able to look back at your code to kind of figure out what you did there. So basically, you use the dot replace function in Python, and this is a solution. It's so easy, right? You just give it a column name and then just replace one value with another. So that was a piece of cake. And then if we look at, our data frame, as you can see here, gender now only has 1s and 2s. However, suppose that you actually have more than 2 numerical values. Suppose you have M, F, and other. If you just convert your categorical variables to numerical values, so M becomes 1, F becomes 2, 3 becomes other becomes 3, you're giving a distance to the relationship between variables. So, 1 is closer to 2 than it is to 3. So you're telling your machine that M is closer to F, since 2 minus 1 equals 1, then M is to other, since 3 minus 1 is 2. And so we want our categories to be independent, right? And this is where one-hot encoding becomes very important. And I'm going to show you what this actually means. And you can obviously also read more about it if you press this link. And so let's revert our gender feature back to its original form and see how to one-hot encode it. So, we'll just replace everything over here. And so the way one-hot encode is, pandas has actually just has a function called get dummies. Super easy. And so, we basically created a new kind of data frame called one-hot. And the way it looks is it has F, M, and subjects in row numbers. And so, as you can see, we convert one categorical feature. So here we had one feature was gender into n binary features, where n is the number of values of that feature. So we have we went from n. So we went from one feature, which is gender, to two features, because in this specific data set, gender can take on two possible values. And essentially what it's telling you is that for this subject, if the subject has a 1 on female, it means it's female. If it has a 1 on male, it means it's male, and vice versa. And you can only have a 1 in one of these two categories for this specific situation. And so the next step is to actually append, this new data frame to DF final, and then you want to drop the gender column in order to avoid duplicate information. So let's do that right over here. And so now that we've done that, so it's the reassignment, and then let's do a quick side check. So, okay, we don't have gender here anymore. Cool. So dropping worked. And if we look here, we have female and male. So that's perfect. So essentially everything is under control. Everything's correct. I mean, the next step is that you want to parse the strings in your data sets. And so the first way to do this is that you're going to try to handle the age feature, right? Because as we saw before, we had 3 non-numerical features: gender, age, and PSQI bedtime. And so to handle the age feature, we're basically looking at a string, right? And so let's just take a look at the value counts over here for starters. So we have an age, so we have 476 subjects that are between ages 26 and 30, 371 subjects between the ages of 31 and 35, 226 subjects between the ages of 22 and 25, and 13 subjects that are over 36 years of age. And so for the sake of this exercise, let's first replace 36 plus with a range. That way all of our categories are ranges, and this will it'll make it easier downstream. So I hope you remember how to use the dot replace function. So pause the video, do it yourself, and then here's a solution. Once again, you can do a lot of this stuff in many different ways. It's just a quick one. So now it's like, make sure this works. So we'll take a look at the value counts, and indeed now instead of having 36 plus, we have 13 subjects that are aged 36 to 40. Okay, so we can also very easily, we don't really need documentation to understand what this means, right? We know basically that we have 4 categories in this situation. So we have a category associated with the age range of 26 to 30. And then, so we know it's minimum age on the left and max age on the right. So these age range strings can therefore be split about this, such that you can create 2 new columns, one for minimal age and one for maximal age. So let's quickly do that. String. So this is string split is a cool function because it basically allows you to take an input and you split a string along this, and then you're going to output as many strings as it takes. And for an input like this, it's going to output 2 strings. So here we did this, and we created a new data frame called fixed age, where you have min on the left and max on the right. So next, basically, let's replace in the final data frame, replace the age range string from the age column for each subject with the mean of the subject's respective age range. So that's basically means that, and a hint is that you want to make sure that the min max columns are converted to numerical data type, and I'll tell you why in a second. So for instance, so here we have fixed age. So if we add fixed age, let's add a column called mean. So you can literally just add this column equals to fix. So let's see, like fix age of max plus fix age of min over 2. oh no, we have a type error. So it's not working, but it should work, right? And there you see that you have a problem with typing, right? So I think the first step to do would actually be to make sure that fixed age, let's see, fixed age, let's see what's the D type, the type of these columns that we created. So it's an object, right? And our min column the same. So what you want to do first is we're going to convert it to float, I think. Check later, but we'll see if this works. If it doesn't work, then we'll see what the solution is. It did not work. Okay, so we're not able to do this. Oh, okay, yeah, you have to cast it as type float, sorry. So you have to do as type float. So what you do is you're gonna rename, you're gonna make these guys floats, and then we can do the same thing that we tried to do before with the mean, and now it's gonna work. And then if you take a look at fixed age, you have min, max, mean, okay? And so we're not really interested in min max for the sake of this exercise. We just want mean. So let's replace age in our final DF with the mean age, because we know now that final DF is an age range. So let's do that. So this is a line of code that allows you to do that right over here. Good. All right. And so then let's just quickly take a look at, let's just look at what our final data frame looks like now. Yeah, so our age range, our age does look like, if we look at more ages, there it looks categorical because we know that they originally actually were categories. So we could have handled this differently. It could have just been one hot encoded for age, but I decided to treat it as though it's a continuous variable. So this is kind of like a arbitrary decision choice. But it's up to you. Because the problem with one hot encoding too much information, it sometimes results here. We have 5 features, and say you one hot encode too many features, you end up with so many features relative to the number of subjects that you then have a problem called sparsity, which might create problems statistically downstream. So if there's other ways to handle your data, it's not a bad idea to do so. And then finally, we want to convert the PSQI bedtime feature. And so we want to convert it from this hour, minute, seconds format to actual just seconds, right? Because otherwise it looks like a string to Python. And so the next line of code uses some slightly more advanced functions that will not be covered kind of in this workshop, but you can walk through it step by step to figure out what each method does. And I'm going to just quickly explain some of it to you. So as you know, over here, right, we have hours. So the format is hour. So there's 3,600 seconds in an hour. Then there's 60 seconds in a minute, and then 1 second in a second. So that's why we created this array. And so here, the way I would kind of go about trying to understand what this script is doing. And this is just for you to know, because I'm sure often you'll be going on Stack Overflow to figure out how to do things or to do it more efficiently. And sometimes you'll see a line of code and it's new functions that you might not have seen before. And so the way to kind of figure out is you can use, you can do little tests. So for instance, here we have an I loop. So here we have a loop that essentially iterates through every subject. So it's going to iterate through every instance of time that we have over here, right? So we know that we have a value I, and let's just replace I with 1 because we want to test this on one subject. So subject that's over here, okay? So that would be the first thing I do. Next, I would narrow it down to here. So we have, we're doing a string splitting function over here, right? So we have so we're looking at the bedtime at point I, and we're splitting it around the 2 dots over here, right? So what does this look like? Oh, int object has no attributes. Okay, well, it's supposed to be, oh yeah, so here first it does use a map function. So let's just quickly take a look at what this does. So this is also, this is good for you to know like how we kind of, how in general you can do this on your own, sort of like looking through. Often when you don't code for like a year or something, you're not going to remember all these like little details about each function, but just know how to kind of look things up. So if we look at, for instance, Python map, the map function. So what this does is that it assigns basically map. What it does is its first input is going to be a function, and its second input is going to be the input to the function. So basically what you're saying over here is we're going to map. So here we do map into this, right? So this is actually our first function. So what you're doing is you're mapping the int function. And I don't know if you remember, but in Python, you can do int of 6.7, this is a float, it's going to convert. So if a equals int of 6.7 and you print a, it's going to output 6. So outputs an integer value, right? So what you're doing here, so map maps a function to a list of values. So what you're doing is you're applying this function to every single element of df final, because as you know over here, when you split of df final dot split of the split, right, of the split function, so what it does is that it's going to split this string, so 22, so you have like 22 0 0 0 0, it's going to split to 22 0 0 0 0, right? And then what it's going to do is going to map the int function. So you're going to basically, it's as though you're doing int of 22, then you're doing int of 0 0, then you're doing int of 0 0, right? So so now basically what you have over here is you have a list of 3 integers. Next, here you have the zip function in Python, right? And we already know what FDR is. So zip in Python, it basically is a zip object, so it allows you to iterate. So you have 2 tuples and it's going to allow you to iterate through. So you're going to be doing something with the first item over here. So with the first item of this, so here, let's replace it to make this more intuitive. So here we have this. And I don't know if I'm doing, well, yeah, okay. Here we have this. And then our second, what we're left with over here is 0 and 0. Right, so here we have 2 lists. So what you're going to be doing is, in this thing, you're going to, for A and B in zip of list 1, list 2. So we're going to start at our first element. A is going to equal to 3600, right? B is going to equal to 22. So, and then you're going to do A times B for A and B in zip of this, right? So A times B here equals to 3600 times 22, which I don't even know what that is. Okay, we have it's 79,000. So we already looked at the first item in each of these 2 lists, so we can cross that off. Next, we're going to go to the second item of our list. So we're going to do for A, B. So now A equals to 60 and B equals to 0, right? So we're going to do A times B, which equals to 0. Cool. So we went through the second item in each of our 2 lists. And then we're going to go through the third item in each of our 2 lists. So we're going to have A equals to 1, B equals to 0, A times B equals to 0. Okay, cool. So now what we know is we're doing a sum, right? And so after all this, we're doing a sum. So what we want to do is a sum of, this 79,200 plus 0 plus 0. And so this is going to output a time in seconds for subject I. And so you're going to replace the time, the time system in hours, minutes, seconds with this. And so you do this for each subject. So hopefully this makes that script a bit more clear and also kind of helps you, gives you an example of how, I guess, one can navigate this sort of situation where you don't really know what all the Python functions are. Everything's super well documented. So for Python, especially. Another note on other strings, often other strings crop up in data frames and need to be replaced with numbers. So you can kind of like, these are examples of strings that often come up. Sometimes you're gonna have false and true. Sometimes you have like empty spaces and you can replace it with NA. So yeah. What else? Okay, so now we can write a quick line of code that basically converts all of our columns to float columns. And this is kind of like the final sanity check, essentially, right? Int blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, this is not working because I might have made an error. Let's see. The int object has no attribute split. We didn't want. Okay, let's see. Oh, I know what I did because I made a mistake. I converted something. I think I did some like data type thing where I converted something to int as an example, and I shouldn't have. So let's just rerun everything. Sorry about that. That's another thing is like the one issue of when essentially when you're like running stuff, doing random things, basically. Let's see. Oh, here. Okay. Basically what happens is like when you're doing random things like what I'm doing, and I've been like modifying the data frame here and there. Sometimes you like deleting cells and stuff and giving random examples, you have to be careful and keep track of what you're doing and try not to like permanently change your data frame, because otherwise this happens where you're like, okay, why isn't it the right data type? So here we're merging again. So we're reviewing kind of what we did. We're dropping all our duplicates. Okay, we're gonna one hot encode our gender. Okay, yeah, let's see. One hot encode our gender here. And then we added a feature, by the way, by doing that. We're gonna replace. Okay, cannot. Okay, so here we already have an error that's code. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, it was as type float, so that makes sense. We did this. And then we did this. Head looks good, okay. And then let's see if this will work now. Okay, it worked, cool. So there's something I accidentally changed one of our column data types to the wrong thing. Sorry about that. So yeah, so then this is just like something I always do as a sanity check. So converting from floats to integers is super straightforward. I mean, integers to floats, but this is just really making sure that your data is numerical. Next, super important is handling and not available in infinite data, because sometimes Python will convert some of your positive, some of your values will become plus or minus infinity, which will lead to downstream errors. So the first step is to convert any possible infinity values to not available and then handle them as NA values. So this is just, so NumPy has ways of doing this. You basically can replace np.inf and minus inf infinity by NA. And then, next you have to deal with your NA values. So first you have to count them to get an idea of what's, how much data are you actually missing. So yeah, you should look this up, but I'm assuming you pause the video. So here so when you do NF, the F final that is NA.sum, you basically get a list of how many missing values you have in each column. And there are a variety of ways to handle non-available data. And the most simple approach is to replace your data with the mean or median value of the feature of interest. And there are a lot of more sophisticated data imputation techniques out there, many of which actually leverage machine learning tools. However, if a feature has too many not available values, you may want to remove it completely. And so you can even define a threshold for the minimal number of missing values that qualifies a feature for removal from your data set. So here we're going to do 12. So here, this is just a fill in the blank. I'm not going to walk you through this because we're getting tight on time, unfortunately. But here's a script for, replacing all your NA values of your data frame with feature specific median, because the median is more robust to outliers than the mean is. And so a quick sanity check to make sure that everything is behaving as expected. And so, oh wait, I didn't run this. So we have a total of 139 missing values in our entire data frame. And after we run this, we're down to 0. And notice the difference between df dot is na.sum. So this is going to just print all the columns. And this actually is going to sum the number of not available data points across your entire data frame. So that's pretty cool. Another important thing is you want to remove columns with the standard deviation of 0. And so why do you think we want to do this? And, the reason why is simple. It's like if the standard deviation is 0, it means it has the same value for all your subjects. So it's not depending. I mean, maybe there's a test for which this is good to know, but normally it's not really giving you more information. But actually, be careful with this, because maybe it is important to know if all your subjects, if one of your features has the same value across subjects. So this isn't like an absolute rule. Everything in data science is like kind of context dependent too. And then so now, like, yeah, write a line of code that removes all the columns with a standard deviation of 0. And so here we go. And then a quick sanity check to make sure it behaved as expected. Here we have a line of code that kind of prints all the columns to have a standard deviation of 0, and normally it shouldn't print any, and it didn't, so perfect. Next is you usually need to perform some sort of feature scaling or normalization. to make sure that all your variables are in the same range, because this affects gradient descent based algorithms and distance algorithms. So for instance, if age ranges from 20 to 40, but then total brain volume ranges from like 1 million to 1.5 million, that's you want to put them within the same range, because if you're putting them in the same analysis, you're kind of comparing them to each other in a way. And so there's a wide variety of ways to normalize. There's min-max scaling, which is often called normalization. There's standardization. There's the z-score. And so, which to use really depends on your data. So normally normalization is good when you know that the distribution of your data does not follow Gaussian distribution. Standardization, on the other hand, so the z-score is helpful in cases where the data does follow Gaussian distribution. There's other popular techniques as well, like the log transform, or dividing your column-wise values by the absolute max value in each column. So that's max ab scalar. And so here's some examples. So here we're going to just implement a line of code that performs z-scoring. So you're basically, for each value in a column, you take that value minus the mean of that in that column divided by the standard deviation of that column. Perfect. And then next we have, scikit-learn, the min-max scalar. And so this is actually slightly different. So this is slightly different from the min-max scaling that's defined above. And this is kind of why in general, scikit-learn is a very important Python package for machine learning. But this is also why in general, it's like, people can sometimes semantics are kind of used very loosely and not always consistent, and it might be there's like field specific semantics, so just be aware of that moving forward. If ever it gets confusing, you have to be aware that sometimes people are going to use certain terms but not refer to exactly the same kind of standardization technique. But yeah, so this is, you can kind of import the scalar from scikit-learn. And then the last step in all this is data visualization, which is really important because it allows you to to know your data in order to plan a relevant analysis or find an appropriate machine learning application. And so Matplotlib and Seaborn are two canonical data visualization tools that you can use in Python, and you'll be learning a lot more about it on Wednesday in the data visualization module. But so below is just like a taster of what lies ahead. So you have to obviously, import these packages. And so one type of plot is the standard scatter plot. So basically what you do is you do plt.scatter x, but what you want on the x-axis, your y-axis. You can label your x and y-axis, and you can even give it a title. And so here I'm giving you a challenge to make a scatter plot of total brain volume as a function of bedtime, but by gender. So here you're gonna have to try to figure out how to plot two different groups in different colors on a scatter plot. So I'm not, given the time constraint, I'm not even gonna give you the answer, but you can find all of them on the GitHub repository that's gonna be linked with the course, basically. So don't worry about this. Next, I'm gonna show you how to do a histogram plot. Those are really fun. They're a good way to get to know the distribution of your data. So here, for instance, we're looking at so here you do, you use Seaborn for that. You put this is just defining, the variable that you the feature that you want to plot. This is going to allow you to use a smooth histogram, and then you're labeling your axes, you're setting a title, and then this is just one way to adjust figure size. So here we have the distribution of total brain volume in our sample. So histogram plots are very elegant. Sometimes they can be pretty fun. So I recommend checking them out. Another little assignment question for you to figure out. And yeah, and then finally, so I did want to kind of touch on to the last section here, which is handling 2D images in Python, because there are many different Python tools that you can use to convert 2D images into NumPy arrays that you can then manipulate in various ways. So image data is just an array at the end of the day, right? A grayscale image is going to be a 2x2 array in which each value is a value associated with a grayscale value. So higher values might be, colors that are more black, and lower values might be more white, or vice versa. And then you sometimes have tensors. So tensor is basically basically you have arrays of the same size that are kind of several arrays of the same size is essentially what a tensor would be. So you can have 3 tensors. So So essentially over here, often for 2D images that are in color, you're going to have 3 arrays, 3 two-dimensional arrays. So one of them is going to be associated with a green value. This is RGB images, right? One's associated with the green value. One array, each entry is going to be associated with a blue value at a specific location in the image. And then blue, so our red, green, and blue. And then one array is going to have numbers associated with how blue each spot of that image is, right? And so I'm going to just show you a bit how to use scikit image to look at them. So, if we go into our image directory, we have a bunch of them. And so the first thing you want to do is create a NumPy array. And here we're taking a look at the shape. So here we created a file name. We did IO im read. So this is just like scikit image has an ability to read image files. So here it's a PNG file. What's interesting here is that I just explained the RGB thing to you. So we would expect, so this is the number of channels, meaning the number of 2D arrays that are superimposed. So we'd expect this to be 3 or 1 if it's a black and white image. So why is it 4 channels? And the reason for that is because it's a PNG file and not a JPEG file. So PNG actually has an additional channel, so an additional 2D array with the numbers associated with the image transparency. So that's just important to be aware of. And then if we look at it, even if it has RGB values, it can still be black and white. So here we have a nice little brain. And so, below is a script. I'm showing you a quick script that displays all of your axial images and using the glob Python module because it interacts with your command line. So it iterates through your directory of interest really quickly. So this is just a quick script. So you can look at kind of all your axial brain images. And essentially what I want you to do next is to basically copy this, but display the sagittal and coronal versions of your images instead. And just, I guess I have time to quickly explain what this does is basically, you create an empty array, right? And then so glob is going to iterate through directory. So you're saying, okay, for every image in the directory that has the word axial in it, what you're going to do is you're going to read this image into a NumPy array. And you're going to actually add it to our original image, our list of images, basically called images, not very creative with names. Then, so it would be a list of 5 images in the end, right? Because you're going to have 5 images that have the word axial in them. Then you create a figure, you modify its dimensions. And so we know we have 5. So this could have been, done a bit more elegantly. Like we could have done, I don't know, let's see, images, length of images. So if length of images is 5, so this is a bit more replaceable. That way, if ever you have more images, you can display more stuff. So what you're going to do is you're going to iterate through each number from 0 to, from 1 to basically length of images, or 0 to length of images minus 1, because in Python, counting actually starts at 0. Doesn't matter. And what you're going to do is you're going to add a subplot in which you're going to plot your first item of your images list. So here you're plotting it. And then, you can kind of print the shape. I wanted to print the shapes just to show you that often in these data sets, the shapes aren't exactly the same, but they all have 4 tensors. And so basically to answer this question, you literally use the same, copy paste this, but replace the word axial with sagittal or coronal. And so here you go. Here's what it kind of looks like. So it just looks pretty. So here you took a look at your images. And then, this is like an easy, not so interesting exercise, which is basically to relate your CSV file to your 2D image. It's gonna, I'm not gonna show you the solution to this, but I'm giving you a subject ID and you should look at their brain and tell me, it will tell you, just find out what age and gender that subject has. And then finally, I just wanted to relate this to Tristan's talk from a few days ago, because he kind of touched on to SciPy a bit. And so what's cool about SciPy, because it's used for, .mat files, but also it can be used for image data, so NumPy arrays, SciPy actually has an ND image package that allows you to manipulate images. And it's really fun because it kind of does a bunch of stuff. So this requires experimentation. There's a lot of, I don't really know what most of this does. So I'm giving you a few examples of like very basic functions that it does, but it's still fun. So if we go back to the original image that I showed you over here, one thing we can do is that we can actually rotate it. right? So ND image, look over here, there's actually a rotation function, right? So let's just take this image. So it's called IMG because I'm very creative with naming images, and let's rotate it by 45 degrees and see what it looks like. So here it is. See, we just rotated it by creating a new image that used nd image.rotate. However, a question for you is there a way to rotate this image such that you're not cropping it? And, to answer this question, if I were you, I would go to the documentation and kind of figure out, okay, like what are all the possible options that we have here? So, for instance, reshape. If reshape is true, the output shape is adapted so that the input array is contained completely in the output. So maybe we should put reshape as true. And as you see over here, now our image is uncropped. The next thing that's kind of fun is we can blur our image using different Gaussian filters. And so image blurring, a Gaussian filter, I'm not, this isn't a class on that, on smoothing kernels, but basically it just, sometimes you may want to blur your image because the resolution is so high that it takes forever to accomplish certain tasks like segmentation or something. So sometimes people want to blur their images on purpose. Sometimes also your image is too grainy, like there's too much noise. So blurring helps reduce noise. So there's different reasons why you'd want to blur an image. And the point of this is not really, not to get into that so much, as to just showcase ND image by SciPy. So, I wanted to show you something interesting that I noticed because I'm not used to, I've never used SciPy ND image before. And I noticed something that I thought was kind of fun, which totally makes sense as well. So say we want to blur our original image. So if you remember PLT, so this is what our image looked like. So let's try to blur it with a Gaussian filter. I set the kernel to 2. So what's weird here is that it looks like we're kind of modifying the transparency here, right? And so I don't know if you remember, but this image originally, all the images in this data set are PNG files. So they actually have so this Gaussian filter is going to blur across all your 2D arrays. So all your channels, your red, green, blue channel, and then your transparency channel, which is why it's outputs this weird transparency value, right? So one thing you can do in order to blur your image without kind of affecting the coloration is to convert it to be one channel, one grayscale channel. Because anyways, this is a gray, black and white image, right? So we may as well just reduce it to one channel. And so, scikit image allows you to do that. You can just quickly image gray, color, RGB to gray is a function that does this very easily. And then voila. Okay, well, it should have, so anyways, normally, so here they're using the Vertis color map by default, but it's basically a 2D, it's basically a grayscale image that has only one channel. So it's exactly the same as this one here. They're just using a different color map. And I think I can maybe CMAP equals maybe gray. Let's see. Yeah, so, okay, so you can modify the color map, or, this one is Vertis. But let's just put it to gray. Gray. Okay, so here we have our image, okay? And so now let's see what happens if we blur our image that's now, been reduced to one channel. Just take a look. Wait, let's once again, just keep the color map consistent. Okay, so see, it looks a lot blurrier now, right? And then the next question is basically a loop that iterates through different Gaussian kernels. So you can see how the more you increase the sigma value, the blurrier the image gets. So for instance, and then I'm going to just correct this such that the CMAP, so the CMAP is going to be PLT that image show CMAP equals gray. Check it out. So as you can see over here, the larger the kernel size, the blurrier the image gets. So anyways, thank you for listening to this talk. Feel free to reach out to me if ever you have any questions about anything. My email is nadia.blaustein@mail.mcgill.ca, and my Twitter is blaustein_nadia. And then, anybody taking this course, can reach out to me on Slack. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. Okay. But anyways, feel free to reach out if you have any questions about this tutorial. And I hope that it was useful for you. Have a lovely day. Thank you.